And of course, the concept of a central bank with a regulated monetary system appealed to the masses of people, because along with this came promises. That is, we'll tax the corporations, and when they pay the tax, you won't have to. And so there was a little element of greed. A little lust and greed was thrown out upon the waters, and people said, well, now that's a pretty good idea. Well, when the income tax was enacted with the Federal Reserve Act, I want you to notice that income tax and paper money came together in the same act. Because there is an old common law statute that says you shall not have an unjust weight or balance in your bag. It's against the law to deal in paper. So when the Federal Reserve came in to offer us paper, there had to be a methodology by which they could tax the paper out of circulation. Otherwise, you have a runaway inflation, which occurred in Germany in 1923. Notice that when the tax was first enacted, it only affected corporations, and the corporations paid approximately 1%. That is, you didn't pay any tax on incomes of $5,000 or less. And from $5,000 to $100,000, it was only 1%. And from $100,000 up, it gradually progressed upward, so that the average person making $5 a day in the Ford factory in 1913, which was $800 a year, wasn't even affected. By today's standards, you'd have to have a tax exemption of $240,000 in order to come around to the same standards that were applied to your great-grandfather in 1913. Now, the Social Security account number came into play in 1935. Between 1913 and 35, there was no tax on you and I. The wage earner working at the Todd shipyards had no fear of having his income taxed. In fact, between 1935, when the tax was enacted upon individuals under the Social Security regime, until 1943, you didn't pay a tax. The tax was first applied to individuals under the Victory Tax Act of 1943, and then was repealed in 1945 pursuant to the constitutional mandate that a direct tax can only be applied for 2 years during time of war. Well, the first man that I ever heard of that picked up on the fraud was A.J. Porth, who in 1944 was a business rep for a labor union. And he noticed that when the Victory Tax Act was repealed, the income tax took its place. And his first question was, where did this power come from? And the answer is, it came from the Social Security Act, which had been enacted 9 years previously and was sold by Arthur Altmeyer Jr., the first commissioner of Social Security, as being an insurance policy. Well, it isn't an insurance policy. It's called by the Supreme Court a welfare scheme. It is called social insurance, but it has no property rights. And it's the first premium of a tontine wagering policy, of which it is a double indemnity policy, and the tax would more rightly be called a premium. You know, when you pay Mutual of Omaha, you don't call it a tax, do you? But for some reason, when you pay your Social Security premium, it's called a tax. Well, the income tax in reality isn't a tax. It's the other half of the premium. Let's take a look at what the courts have determined over the years. The Social Security account number is a grant of extra common law limited liability franchise, upon which benefits and costs, which are called an excise tax, may be levied. It is a license required by the state from individuals before they can be hired by corporations. Corporations are creatures of the state. These state-created corporate franchise employment is extra common law and can therefore, in addition, be indirectly excise taxed as an additional franchise. Now what we learned from that is working for Mutual of Omaha, General Electric, or Bendix is a privilege. You have no common law right to work for a corporation or for a state government. It's a franchise, it's a privilege, and an excise tax is called a privilege tax. Secondly, the Social Security account number is a congressional grant of grace. It is a grant of franchise of right in the nature of that described in the class of cases represented by New Colonial versus Halvering, cited at 292 U.S. 435. And introduces us now to corporate law, which in ancient times was called the Roman law merchants, which has its origins clear back to the Tower of Babel, but more recently, about 945 BC on the island of Rhodes, and progressed through the Middle East, and was last codified by the Hanseatic League of Germany. And it was called the Hanseatic League of Merchants, of which the East India Tea Company was one of the members. Today, in your state, you call it the Uniform Commercial Code. Underlying this corporate law is a more important body of law, which is called the Law of Corporations, or the Uniform Commercial Code. Corporations are juristic state-created persons. Under corporate law, the creator, the state, of these corporations may demand anything that it prefers from its creature within constitutional bounds, and it may regulate it in any manner whatsoever. Shockingly, the state may destroy or create a person, then regulate it by taxation, or can even destroy it by use of taxation. See Enoch versus Williams and VZ Bank versus Fenno. Both cited at Enoch versus Williams.